Some mysteries are buried in the woods. Others lie beneath the sea. In 1968, the USS Scorpion, one of America's most advanced submarines, set sail across the Atlantic and simply disappeared. 99 souls. Gone. No SOS. No wreckage. Just silence, deep and endless. Weeks later, the Navy quietly confirmed what families feared. The Scorpion had sunk, but how it sank was never explained. Some said a torpedo exploded from within. Others whispered about Soviet retaliation or a secret mission that went catastrophically wrong. The official report was vague, the details redacted, and yet the deeper investigators searched. The stranger the evidence became. Unusual acoustic patterns, metal fragments that didn't match U.S. design, and above all, an eerie similarity to another event that would happen years later in Russia. The Dyatlov Pass. Both cases, ordinary missions, turned into unsolvable mysteries. Both ending in silence. Both surrounded by theories that refused to die. Maybe it was mechanical failure. Maybe sabotage. Or maybe something humanity was never meant to understand. In the ocean's coldest depths, sound behaves strangely. Pressure twists metal, distorts signals, and echoes can seem to come from nowhere. But what if those echoes aren't echoes at all? What if the Scorpion is still calling, across time, across silence? For someone to listen? Welcome to Mystery Vault 80, where the unexplained meets the unforgettable. If this mystery intrigues you, hit like, share your theories in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the next unsolved chapter. Because sometimes, the answers aren't hidden in the dark. They are the dark. The day the ocean went silent. Low rumble of sonar pings, the distant hum of an engine, and then silence. May 21st, 1968. The U.S. Navy submarine USS Scorpion, Assistant 589, leaves the naval base in Rota, Spain, on what should have been a routine return to Norfolk, Virginia. 99 men aboard, sailors, engineers, sons, husbands, all veterans of the Cold War's most secret underwater operations. But somewhere in the vast, cold depths of the Atlantic, between the Azores and Bermuda, the Scorpion goes silent. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, no survivors. The U.S. Navy waits. Hours turn into days. Wives stay glued to telephones that never ring. Mothers stare out to sea, whispering prayers. The Atlantic, however, remains mute. When the Scorpion fails to report in, the Navy declares her overdue. But inside classified corridors in Washington, alarm bells are already sounding. This isn't just a lost vessel. It's a nuclear-powered submarine carrying 2 live nuclear torpedoes. Suddenly, the disappearance of the Scorpion isn't just a tragedy. It's a national security nightmare. Investigators are mobilized. Search operations begin across 3,000 miles of ocean. The Soviet fleet is spotted shadowing the area, and rumors swirl. Had the Scorpion been sunk by a Soviet torpedo during a secret chase? Or was the truth more disturbing? A failure the Navy tried to bury beneath layers of classified silence? For the families of the 99 men aboard, there would be no closure, only uncertainty. The Navy's official word, cause unknown. But in the years to come, insiders, divers, and whistleblowers would tell a darker story, one that points to a cover-up at the highest levels of the Pentagon. The ghost below the waves. Soft ocean currents, sonar pings fading into echoing silence. The Atlantic Ocean, vast, cold, eternal. Beneath its surface lies a graveyard of ships, planes, and dreams swallowed whole by time. But among them, one stand apart, the USS Scorpion. It was May 1968 when the submarine vanished. 99 souls aboard. No distress call. No trace on radar. Just gone. The world above carried on, but deep below, something had shifted. Fishermen whispered about strange lights under the water. Sonar operators picked up ghostly echoes, metallic creaks where nothing should be. And yet, for 5 long months, the Atlantic kept her secret. When the wreck was finally found 10,000 feet down, it told a story too strange to explain. The The submarine was shattered, twisted, as if crushed by an unseen hand. The Navy said it was an accident, but oceanographers, divers, and psychic researchers alike would later call it something else, a haunting. Even now, decades later, the site remains off-limits. Those who've seen the wreck say they feel watched, as if something or someone is still down there, waiting. In this story, we don't just explore a submarine's fate. We explore what happens when the sea itself decides to keep a secret. Low-frequency sonar pulses echo like heartbeats beneath the ocean. The USS Scorpion's final voyage began under strange omens. Before her departure from Rota, crew members sent uneasy letters home. One sailor wrote, "Something doesn't feel right about this run. We shouldn't be going out again so soon." It was his last message. The submarine dove into the Atlantic, and then odd signals began. Radio operators reported garbled Morse code, faint sonar echoes that seemed to come from nowhere. And on May 22nd, the Scorpion sent her last known transmission. Short, encrypted, and never fully decoded. Some say the Navy knew more. That listening stations across the Atlantic detected a series of underwater explosions, followed by silence. Others believe something else was lurking below, something not built by human hands. When the wreck was later discovered by a classified deep-sea operation, the Scorpion was found twisted, its hull ripped open as if crushed from within. Experts called it implosion damage, but the pattern was unnatural, uneven, like a force pressed in different directions at once. Divers who visited the site in later years described a strange stillness, a sense that time itself felt heavier there. Instruments malfunctioned. Cameras refused to focus. It was as though the ocean didn't want the truth to be seen. Theories spread. A runaway torpedo, a Soviet ambush, a classified weapons test gone wrong, or something stranger. Was the Scorpion's final mission part of an experiment the Navy never admitted? Or did she encounter something beyond human understanding? Something waiting in the depths of the Atlantic? The sea that swallowed the Scorpion. In May of 1968, the Atlantic Ocean was calm and deceptively peaceful. Beneath the waves, the USS Scorpion moved like a silent phantom, its steel hull gliding through the cold darkness, carrying 99 souls toward destiny. It was a submarine born in secrecy, armed with nuclear power and deadly torpedoes. Yet, as it left the U.S. naval base in Norfolk, Virginia, unease rippled through the crew. Reports claimed the vessel wasn't in ideal condition. Strange electrical problems, battery malfunctions, even a torpedo system that had misfired during tests. All were quietly noted but never fixed. Still, orders were orders. Commander Francis Slattery led his men out into the deep Atlantic one last time. As days passed, the Scorpion moved through cold underwater currents, trailing Soviet movements and logging strange sonar patterns. Some crewmen reported unexplained sounds, echoes that didn't match known submarines or sea creatures. Others spoke of equipment flickering, like something unseen was interfering with the systems. On May 15, 1968, Scorpion sent her final transmission. A standard update. No sign of trouble. Then nothing. No distress call. No debris. No oil slick. It was as if the ocean itself had chosen to erase the submarine from existence. When the Navy declared the Scorpion missing, rumors began almost immediately. Had it been struck by a secret Soviet weapon? Did a torpedo detonate inside the ship? Or did something even stranger happen beneath those crushing depths? Something no radar could detect? Weeks later, sonar operators picked up a distant underwater explosion. A single muffled thud, followed by eerie silence. The coordinates matched Scorpion's route. But to this day, no one knows what truly happened during those final, ghostly moments. Because the Atlantic doesn't give up her secrets easily, and the Scorpion's ghost still whispers somewhere far below the waves. The search beneath the silence. When a U.S. Navy submarine fails to report in, the world doesn't hear about it. At least, not right away. For nearly a week after the USS Scorpion's disappearance in May 1968, silence blanketed the Atlantic like a shroud. Only those within classified Navy circles knew that something had gone terribly wrong. At first, officials hoped for a communication failure. Submarines often went silent during deep operations, but as the hours turned to days, even the most cautious optimists began to lose hope. The Navy quietly initiated a full-scale recovery effort, codenamed Operation Scorpion Search. The hunt begins. The search zone covered millions of square miles of open ocean, a depth averaging 10,000 feet. So vast, it was like looking for a coin on the ocean floor. Ships equipped with sonar, reconnaissance planes, and classified undersea listening devices began to triangulate the last known signal from Scorpion. But the data didn't add up. The SOSUS network, America's top-secret underwater listening system, had recorded a series of strange sounds on May 22, 1968. 5 acoustic events occurred within 190 seconds. Sharp metallic cracks followed by a deep, resonating explosion. To the untrained ear, it meant nothing. But to the Navy's acoustic analysts, it was the telltale echo of a hull imploding under immense water pressure, the sound of a submarine crushed by the deep. The coordinates placed the incident 400 miles southwest of the Azores, the same area Scorpion had last transmitted from. For the families waiting at home, wives, children, parents, the silence was unbearable. Officially, there was no announcement yet. Behind closed doors, the Navy debated how much to reveal and how to word the inevitable truth. The grim discovery. Months later, the search vessel USS Mizar, equipped with deep-sea photographic equipment, was deployed to scan the ocean floor. At a depth of 9,800 feet, sonar picked up an anomaly, a shape that didn't belong to the natural contours of the seabed. When the first images came back, the command room fell silent. There it was, the shattered hull of the USS Scorpion, lying twisted on the seabed. The submarine had broken in two, its steel frame imploded inward like a crushed can. The images were haunting, the once proud ship now grave. The propellers still intact, the conning tower half buried in silt. The Navy confirmed what everyone already feared. All 99 men were lost. But even in death, Scorpion refused to give answers. There were no visible signs of external attack, no torpedo impact, no collision. And yet, experts couldn't explain how a vessel designed to withstand 1,500 feet of pressure had catastrophically failed nearly 10,000 feet down. Some analysts suspected a torpedo detonation within the sub, possibly triggered by a malfunction. Others whispered about Soviet involvement, pointing out that a Soviet flotilla had been detected in the same area just days before. The cover-up theories. The public announcement finally came on June 5, 1968, 3 weeks after Scorpion's last transmission. The official cause, mechanical malfunction. But many within the Navy weren't convinced. Documents were sealed. Crew logs disappeared. Families were told not to ask too many questions. And quietly, the word classified became their only answer. For decades, pieces of the puzzle have leaked through cracks in the walls of secrecy, suggesting there was far more to the story. Why had Scorpion been sent out despite documented mechanical faults? Why were distress beacons disabled? And why did the Navy order immediate restriction on photographs of the wreckage site? The ocean's verdict. The USS Scorpion rests today 3 miles beneath the surface, still armed with 2 nuclear torpedoes, silent, sleeping, and deadly. To this day, the wreck is monitored by underwater drones to ensure radiation hasn't leaked into the surrounding sea. But for investigators and historians alike, the Scorpion's fate remains one of the Cold War's most haunting enigmas. Part tragedy, part cover-up, and part warning from the deep. Because sometimes the ocean doesn't just take. It keeps secrets, and the deeper you dive, the darker they become. The investigation that never ended. When the wreckage of the USS Scorpion was finally confirmed, the U.S. Navy's official stance was brief and cautious. A tragic accident. No survivors. Cause unknown. But behind closed doors, the tone was far more urgent and deeply divided. Within days of the discovery, classified orders were sent to multiple Navy intelligence divisions. Engineers, oceanographers, acoustic analysts, and counterintelligence officers were assembled under one roof. Their mission: determine what really happened at the bottom of the Atlantic. The Red File. The case was designated as Project Azorian Echo. Every piece of data, sonar tapes, acoustic graphs, maintenance reports, was labeled top secret and locked inside a room known only to those with Q clearance access. Investigators first looked at the mechanical angle. The Scorpion had been one of the oldest nuclear submarines in active service. Deployed in 1960, it had missed multiple overhauls due to budget cuts and Cold War urgency. Leaked memos later revealed that before its final mission, engineers had flagged critical issues: faulty wiring in the torpedo control systems, corrosion in the ballast tanks, and defective seals that could cause flooding under deep pressure. If those warnings were ignored, as some claimed, then the Scorpion was sailing into danger long before it ever left port. But others within the task force believed something far more sinister had occurred: the Soviet shadow. In 1968, the Cold War was at its deadliest peak. Both superpowers were shadowing each other's submarines in a deadly game of underwater chess. Around the same time Scorpion vanished, a Soviet Echo II-class sub was reported off the Azores, armed and tracking American movements. Documents declassified decades later suggested that Scorpion had been shadowing this Soviet vessel before it disappeared. Some experts believed it was struck by a Soviet torpedo, possibly in retaliation for an earlier American provocation. But there was no proof, or at least none that was ever made public. The official Navy inquiry dismissed the Soviet theory outright, calling it speculative. Still, survivors' families couldn't ignore the eerie coincidence. Just weeks before Scorpion was lost, another U.S. submarine, the USS Thresher, had also imploded at sea under similarly mysterious circumstances. Two advanced nuclear submarines destroyed within 5 years, both officially labeled mechanical failures. Was it just coincidence? Or part of a hidden war being fought beneath the waves? The vanishing evidence. By late 1969, the Navy's final report was ready, or so they claimed. The summary concluded that Scorpion likely suffered a catastrophic internal explosion caused by a hot-running torpedo that detonated prematurely. But then something strange happened. The full report, over 500 pages long, was classified indefinitely. Only 2 paragraphs were made public. Even the families of the 99 crew members were denied access. When journalists and naval historians filed Freedom of Information Act requests, the response was always the same: no additional records found. And the deeper they dug, the more evidence seemed to vanish. Crew maintenance logs disappeared. Radio recordings from Scorpion's last known transmission were lost. Even acoustic data from SOSUS, the underwater listening system, was reprocessed and replaced with sanitized versions. It was as if someone wanted the ocean to keep its secrets. The whistleblower. In 1975, a retired Navy analyst named John Craven broke his silence. Craven had been part of the original task force assigned to analyze the Scorpion disaster. He claimed that during internal simulations, his team determined that the most probable cause was not a mechanical malfunction, but an internal torpedo detonation caused by an electrical fault. However, Craven alleged that higher-ranking officials rejected his conclusion, fearing it would expose Navy negligence and compromise public trust during the height of the Cold War. It wasn't an accident, Craven told a reporter years later. It was a chain of ignored warnings and deliberate silence. The silence of a sea. Officially, the U.S. Navy still lists the cause as inconclusive. Unofficially, the Scorpion has become one of the most heavily guarded secrets in naval history. Every few years, a new theory resurfaces, sometimes from declassified documents, sometimes from divers or researchers who claim to have seen something unusual near the wreck site. But the truth, like the Scorpion itself, remains buried beneath nearly 10,000 feet of darkness. Even today, deep-sea monitoring equipment records faint metallic echoes from the wreck, sounds some experts say are natural shifts in the hull. Others, though, call it something else. It's the ocean remembering, one researcher said. The sea never forgets what men try to hide, the theories that refuse to sink. Even after official reports were sealed, the story of the USS Scorpion refused to rest quietly on the ocean floor. Every few years, a new theory surfaced, each more disturbing than the last. From mechanical malfunction to espionage gone wrong, from torpedo failure to Cold War retaliation, every angle was dissected, debated, and denied. But one thing was clear: something about the official story didn't add up. Theory 1. The torpedo that turned back. The most widely accepted theory, even within the Navy, was that a defective torpedo detonated inside the submarine. The Scorpion had been carrying a Mark 37 torpedo, one of the most advanced of its time. But several of those torpedoes had been flagged for instability, capable of hot running, where the engine activates while still inside the launch tube. In such a case, the torpedo could circle back toward the sub's magnetic field, mistaking its own ship for the enemy. Imagine the horror. A crew realizing too late that their own weapon had turned against them. A steel predator chasing its maker through the black depths. The implosion recordings, analyzed decades later, showed 2 sharp detonations followed by a massive pressure collapse, consistent with an internal explosion. Yet, if this were true, why classify the evidence? Why seal the sonar logs and crew maintenance files? Some say it wasn't the cause they wanted to hide. It was the failure to prevent it. Theory 2. The Soviet retaliation. Then came the Cold War theory, the one that haunted Washington for years. In early 1968, the U.S. had successfully tapped Soviet communication cables in the Sea of Okhotsk, stealing military secrets through a covert mission. Shortly after, a Soviet submarine, the K-129, mysteriously sank in the Pacific. The Americans secretly recovered parts of it through Project Azorian, a mission still partly classified today. And then, within weeks, the USS Scorpion vanished. To some intelligence officers, it looked like revenge. Rumors began to circulate that the Scorpion was targeted and destroyed by a Soviet torpedo in retaliation for K-129. Declassified documents show that a Soviet naval flotilla had indeed been operating near the Azores at the same time. But no official report ever confirmed a confrontation. Still, a few senior officers who reviewed classified SOSUS data in the 1980s claimed they saw patterns consistent with pursuit, suggesting that Scorpion had been tailed before vanishing. Was it Cold War vengeance, swept under the rug to prevent open conflict? Or just another convenient ghost story born from paranoia? No one in the Pentagon would ever say. Theory 3. The electrical fault and the broken arrow. A lesser-known, but deeply alarming theory emerged in the 1990s. According to internal Navy repair memos, Scorpion had ongoing electrical system issues before her final voyage, especially in the torpedo heating circuits. If those circuits malfunctioned underwater, they could trigger a warhead detonation without warning. But there's something far more chilling. Scorpion was armed with 2 nuclear torpedoes. If either detonated or cracked under pressure, it would have caused what the military calls a broken arrow, an accident involving nuclear weapons. Though the Navy denied any nuclear release, independent researchers have detected unusual radiation signatures near the wreck site. To this day, the exact condition of those torpedoes remains classified. If radiation had leaked, admitting it publicly could cause international outrage, and questions no government wants to answer. Theory 4. The human factor. Another haunting theory emerged from crew families and ex-sailors. Some believe Scorpion was sailing with a mutiny brewing below deck. In early 1968, reports surfaced that several crewmen had expressed concerns about the vessel's safety and refused orders during testing drills. The commanding officer, Commander Francis Slattery, was reportedly under stress, dealing with morale issues and fatigue. Did human error, panic, or a rushed decision contribute to the disaster? Was there a desperate maneuver to surface too fast, causing catastrophic failure? We'll never know. The Navy's psychological profiles of the crew were also classified permanently. The ocean's only witness. The deeper investigators looked, the more Scorpion's story dissolved into contradictions and secrecy. Each theory seemed plausible, yet none complete. The ocean, it seemed, had swallowed not just the submarine, but the truth itself. In 1985, a deep-sea survey by Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who found the Titanic, confirmed what many already suspected. The wreck bore no external battle damage, but definite signs of internal explosion. Still, Ballard was ordered not to film certain sections of the wreck, including the torpedo room. He later described it as one of the eeriest places I've ever seen. Echoes of the deep. Over half a century later, the Scorpion remains a silent tomb, its 99 crewmen still entombed in darkness. Their names are engraved on memorials, but their story, the real one, is written only in whispers. Every attempt to reopen the case has been met with redacted files and military silence. As one investigator once said, "We found the submarine. What we never found was the truth." And in the cold, crushing stillness of the Atlantic, the USS Scorpion waits. Its hull fractured, its secrets intact, and its echoes forever whispering through the dark water that no one can truly hear. Echoes of the families left behind. When the USS Scorpion disappeared, it wasn't just a submarine that vanished. It was 99 fathers, sons, husbands, and brothers, swallowed by the Atlantic without a trace of warning. For their families, what followed wasn't closure. It was silence. The telegrams. In late May of 1968, telegrams began to arrive at Navy households across America. Each was brief, clinical, and cold. Just a few words that shattered entire worlds. "We regret to inform you that the USS Scorpion is overdue and presumed lost." There were no explanations, no comfort, just the heavy finality of official language. In Norfolk, Virginia, the submarine's home port, Navy wives gathered on the pier every evening, watching the horizon. Some still believed the Scorpion would surface, battered but alive. But as the days turned into weeks, hope began to sink with the same weight as the submarine itself. One mother later recalled, "I waited by the phone every night. I thought maybe he'd call from a ship. Even after they said it was over, I still left the porch light on." The memorial that felt like a lie. When the Navy declared the Scorpion officially lost, it organized a memorial at the Norfolk Naval Base. Rows of widows and children sat beneath a gray, overcast sky as officers read names aloud, one by one, into the wind. But behind the solemnity, there was anger. Because even at that moment, no one could tell them why their loved ones were gone. Some families said the ceremony felt forced, like a final effort to close a chapter the Navy didn't want reopened. Afterward, many began demanding answers, filing petitions, contacting Congress, writing letters that went unanswered for decades. One letter from 1970 read, "If it was an accident, we deserve to know how. If it was something more, we deserve the truth." The wives who became investigators. Several of the Scorpion's widows didn't accept the Navy's explanations. Among them was Mary Slattery, the commanding officer's wife, who began keeping her own file of notes, letters, and clippings. She spent years trying to contact technicians, ex-Navy officers, and even sonar experts, piecing together fragments the government had buried. Her quiet investigation inspired others. By the late 1970s, a small group of families began informally calling themselves the Scorpion Circle. They shared documents, compared inconsistencies, and pushed for the declassification of the Navy's internal findings. In 1983, one of them finally received a heavily redacted report, 150 pages of black ink and bureaucratic evasion. Every answer, it seemed, was hidden behind the phrase, "Information withheld in the interest of national security." To these families, that wasn't protection, it was betrayal. Children who grew up with ghosts. For the children of the lost crew, the tragedy became a permanent shadow. Some grew up barely remembering their fathers, only their uniforms, medals, and the way their mothers cried quietly when certain songs came on the radio. One son, interviewed years later, said, "Every Father's Day, I'd draw a submarine in the ocean and put a sun over it. But I always made the water dark because that's where he was." Others joined the Navy themselves, hoping to understand what happened. Some returned bitter, realizing even within the ranks, Scorpion was a topic whispered about but never discussed. There were even reports of sailors being told during training, "Don't ask about Scorpion. Just know she never came home." The reporter who wouldn't let go. In the late 1990s, investigative journalist Ed Offley reopened the case after decades of secrecy. He interviewed former sonar analysts who believed the Navy knew exactly where Scorpion went down within hours, but withheld that information from families for months. Offley's book, Scorpion Down, accused U.S. officials of covering up a possible Cold War confrontation. The Navy denied it, but refused to release the full sonar data that could confirm or refute his claims. To this day, the complete audio logs of the Scorpion's final moments remain classified, despite repeated freedom of information requests. The weight of unfinished mourning. Even today, more than 5 decades later, the pain hasn't faded. At the Norfolk Memorial, families gather each May to lay flowers at the base of a black granite wall etched with the names of the 99 men. Visitors say it's the silence that hits hardest, the stillness of the ocean breeze that seems to whisper the same question everyone still asks. Why? The truth may be 10,000 feet beneath the surface, but for those who lost someone aboard the Scorpion, the grief has never resurfaced. As one widow said in an interview years later, "The sea took their bodies, but the government took their truth. And still, the ocean keeps its secrets. The Atlantic is vast, cold, and eternal. Somewhere, deep within it, lies a steel tomb, untouched, unspoken, and unexplainable." It's said that when sonar buoys pass near the site, the water carries faint echoes, metallic creaks, subtle rumbles, as though the Scorpion still drifts restlessly. For those who listen closely, it's a reminder that beneath the calmest waters, there are still stories that refuse to stay buried. The wreck that shouldn't have been found. For nearly 5 months, the Atlantic Ocean held its silence. Then, in October 1968, the U.S. Navy's deep-sea research vessel Mizar detected something, a faint sonar echo, 400 miles southwest of the Azores. The shape on the screen was unmistakable. A submarine, resting nearly 10,000 feet below the surface, half buried in silt. The USS Scorpion had been found, but finding her didn't bring peace. It brought more questions than answers. The descent into the abyss. The Navy sent unmanned cameras down into the blackness, remotely operated submersibles equipped with primitive video equipment. What they captured was haunting. A twisted hull, broken in two, her propellers half buried in the mud. The forward section was crushed inward, as if by an enormous force. The sail, the submarine's fin, had snapped off and rested meters away. Scattered around were pieces of debris, oxygen tanks, fragments of steel, even a torn safety manual drifting eerily in the current. For the first time in decades, the world glimpsed the final resting place of 99 American sailors, a silent grave sealed by 3,000 meters of pressure. But there was something about the wreck that didn't fit. The Scorpion looked as though it had imploded inward, not exploded outward, meaning whatever caused her to sink happened from within. No salvage attempt will be made. After the discovery, families waited anxiously for news, hoping for closure or at least the recovery of remains. But the Navy issued a short, chilling statement. Due to the depth and location of the wreck, no salvage operations will be conducted. That was it. No recovery mission. No retrieval of the black box equivalent, known as the acoustic recording system. No attempt to bring home the remains of the 99 men. The Scorpion was to remain where she was, forever. Yet, many experts questioned that decision. By 1968, the Navy had already conducted deep-sea retrievals from similar depths. They had even retrieved parts of a hydrogen bomb lost in the Mediterranean 2 years earlier. So why not Scorpion? Some suspected the real reason wasn't technical, but political. The censorship of the images. When photographs of the wreck site were finally taken by the U.S. Navy's Deep Submergent Systems project, they were immediately classified top secret. Only a handful of officials, and no family members, were ever allowed to view them. In 1970, A few low-quality photos leaked through unofficial channels, showing the crumpled submarine lying eerily on her side. Experts outside the military were stunned. The damage didn't resemble a normal accident. It looked as though the Scorpion had suffered an internal detonation, possibly from a torpedo or catastrophic electrical event. Yet every time researchers tried to push for details, they were met with the same answer: national security reasons. The scientists who questioned the official story. In 1974, Dr. John Craven, a leading Navy physicist who had helped locate the submarine, made a cryptic statement in a private interview. He said, "We found her by following the path of a weapon that never should have fired." When pressed for details, he refused to elaborate. Another Navy engineer claimed that the Scorpion's torpedo bay showed signs of explosion damage inconsistent with a collision or mechanical fault. But those reports were quietly removed from subsequent versions of the investigation file. By the late 1970s, conspiracy theories had begun to circulate. Was Scorpion sunk by her own malfunctioning torpedo, or had she been attacked by a Soviet submarine during a Cold War chase gone wrong? The truth, it seemed, was as deep as the ocean that buried her. The forbidden coordinates. In the 1980s, declassified documents revealed something else. The exact coordinates of the Scorpion wreck had been marked as restricted waters on U.S. naval charts. Even oceanographic expeditions were forbidden from entering that zone without explicit permission. When journalists asked why, the Navy's response was chillingly vague. The site is considered a war grave and a matter of national security. But the restriction wasn't consistent with other lost submarines. Why did the Scorpion's grave require such secrecy? Some believe that beneath the guise of respect, the real motive was concealment. That something about the wreck's condition could expose truths the Navy had spent decades suppressing. The deep sea still watches. In 1986, oceanographer Robert Ballard, the same man who would later find the Titanic, quietly visited the Scorpion wreck site during a classified mission. His goal, officially, was to study submarine corrosion. But unofficially, he was also there to assess the site's damage patterns. Ballard later revealed he was asked by the Navy to survey Scorpion first, before being allowed to use their resources to find the Titanic. The arrangement was clear. Do Scorpion, then you can do Titanic. He confirmed that the wreck appeared violently compressed inward, which aligned with the implosion theory, yet refused to discuss details beyond that. When asked if he thought the Scorpion had been attacked, he said, "I can't answer that, but I can tell you, she didn't go down easy, a tomb beneath the waves." Today, sonar scans show the Scorpion still lies nearly 10,000 feet deep, her hull cracked open like a wound frozen in time. The debris field stretches over 500 feet, silent, untouched, and sacred. No divers are allowed. No cameras beyond government research are permitted. And yet, when remotely operated vehicles pass by, their instruments often pick up unexplained sounds. Faint pings, low metallic thuds, rhythmic creaks. Some call it sonar interference. Others call it the Scorpion's heartbeat. In the decades since her loss, the USS Scorpion has become more than a tragedy. It's become a symbol of truth lost to the deep, of the cost of silence, and of the families who still wait for a closure they may never receive. But the ocean never forgets, and as technology advances, it may only be a matter of time before the truth, buried in darkness for over half a century, finally resurfaces. Cold War shadows. The retaliation theory. When the USS Scorpion vanished in 1968, it wasn't just a maritime disaster. It was a Cold War event. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a deadly game of secrecy, and beneath the surface of the world's oceans, submarines prowled like predators in the dark. But what if Scorpion wasn't lost to mechanical failure? What if she was hunted down, the victim of a silent act of war? A pattern of death beneath the waves. In May 1968, within just a few months, 4 submarines from different nations went down mysteriously. January 1968, Israel's INS Dakar disappears in the Mediterranean. March 1968, the Soviet submarine K-129 sinks in the Pacific. May 1968. The U.S. Navy loses USS Scorpion in the Atlantic. October 1968. The French submariner vanishes off Toulon. Vanishings. 4 subs. 1 year. No survivors. Coincidence, or something far darker? Many intelligence analysts didn't think it was random. They believed these accidents were retaliations, secret operations buried beneath diplomacy and denial. The Soviet sub that started it all. 2 months before Scorpion went missing, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine, K-129, sank under mysterious circumstances north of Hawaii. It was carrying 3 nuclear missiles, each capable of leveling a city. At first, the Soviets assumed the U.S. Navy was behind it. Their suspicions weren't unfounded. U.S. submarines routinely trailed Soviet vessels to gather intelligence. And when K-129 vanished, Soviet naval activity in the Pacific surged overnight. By late spring of 1968, Soviet attack subs had begun shadowing American fleets more aggressively, including those operating near the Azores, the same region where Scorpion would later disappear. Coincidence? Or retribution? The Soviet tracker. According to declassified intelligence reports released in the 1990s, Scorpion was being followed. A Soviet naval task force had been operating in the same area at the time of her last transmission. Among them, the submarine K-219, a diesel-electric vessel known for surveillance operations. American sonar operators later confirmed that, just hours before contact was lost, Scorpion had sent an unusual message to command. Going to observation depth, tracking Soviet vessels. That was her final report. Moments later, she vanished. A message from the deep. In 1975, a whistleblower from the Naval Intelligence Service claimed that the Scorpion incident had been covered up to avoid an international crisis. According to his leaked memo, the sub was torpedoed by the Soviets in response to the loss of K-129. The memo stated, "Reciprocal action confirmed. We lost 1 for 1. Official explanation withheld under Cold War Secrecy Act." Though the Navy denied it, several CIA officers later corroborated that quiet agreements existed between both nations, an understanding that some losses would remain unspoken, as long as the balance of fear remained intact. To them, the truth wasn't just inconvenient, it was too dangerous. The leak that changed everything. In 1993, declassified Soviet archives revealed a chilling entry in the log of Admiral Vladimir Chernovin, commander of the Soviet Northern Fleet during the 1960s. The line was brief and cryptic. May 23, 1968. The Americans mourn their lost hunters. Historians debated its meaning for years, but to intelligence analysts, it was clear. The phrase hunters was Cold War slang for U.S. attack submarines like Scorpion. Was the admiral acknowledging her loss, or confessing involvement? Spy games and secrets. The Scorpion's mission before its disappearance remains classified even today. But fragments of declassified communications hint that it wasn't a routine patrol. She had been rerouted suddenly to monitor Soviet fleet maneuvers near the Canary Islands and possibly intercept signals from a suspected Soviet spy vessel. Some historians now believe she was carrying sensitive surveillance gear, capable of intercepting coded transmissions, a device the Soviets may have wanted silenced. Adding to the intrigue, one of the Scorpion's crewmen, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rogers, had reportedly been under investigation for espionage before deployment, an accusation the Navy quietly buried after the incident. Did someone on board help set the trap? Operation Azorian, the Ghost Connection. In the 1970s, the CIA launched Operation Azorian, a secret $500 million mission to recover the Soviet sub K-129 from the Pacific using Howard Hughes' ship, the Glomar Explorer. Publicly, it was a deep-sea mining project. Privately, it was about one thing: retrieving Soviet secrets from a wreck. When the operation was partially revealed, journalists discovered that a similar covert recovery plan had been considered for the Scorpion, but abruptly canceled. Some claim it was because what they might find could expose a truth that risked igniting a nuclear confrontation. Cold War silence. By the late 1980s, both governments had adopted the same narrative. mechanical failure, bad luck, nothing more. But declassified memos tell a different story. The U.S. Navy's own acoustic analysis found two explosive sounds seconds apart, one matching the signature of a torpedo detonation. And that data was quietly removed from the public report. To this day, the U.S. Navy's official statement remains. The precise cause of loss cannot be determined. But among naval veterans, the whispers persist. That Scorpion didn't just sink, she was sunk. The haunting legacy. The families of the 99 men aboard were left with medals, folded flags, and silence. Some of them spent decades writing letters, pleading for answers. Others took their fight to court, but every time they were met with redactions, missing pages, or national security stamps. In the words of one widow, the sea took them. The truth took the rest. As the Cold War froze truths beneath layers of secrecy, the story of a USS Scorpion became not just a military mystery, but a human one. What really happened in those final minutes before the ocean claimed her? And what if the last clue wasn't hidden in a government file, but in the acoustic whispers recorded that night, the sounds of a dying submarine, crying out from the deep? The Cold War retaliation, secrets beneath the surface. By mid-1968, the world's oceans had become the most dangerous chessboard on Earth. Every move made beneath the waves was a message. Every disappearance, a whisper of war. And when the USS Scorpion went missing that May, it didn't happen in isolation. It happened in a storm of silent confrontations between the world's two nuclear superpowers. Many still believe that Scorpion's sinking was no accident, that it was an act of revenge, a message written in torpedoes and sealed beneath the Atlantic. For submarines, 1 year, no survivors. The year was 1968, and it was one of the darkest in naval history. In less than 12 months, for submarines from 4 nations were lost. Israel's INS Dakar, January 1968 Soviet K-129, March 1968 USS Scorpion, May 1968 France Minerve, January 1969, barely 7 months later. No survivors. No conclusive explanations. It was as though the oceans had swallowed them all, one by one. Conspiracy theorists, retired officers, and even former intelligence analysts began to notice a pattern. What if these losses were not coincidences, but tit-for-tat retaliations, part of a secret war fought far below the surface? The K-129 connection. 2 months before the Scorpion's disappearance, the Soviet submarine K-129 vanished in the North Pacific. She carried 3 nuclear missiles, each armed and ready for launch. American intelligence knew something catastrophic had happened when their early warning satellites detected a massive underwater explosion in the Pacific. But while the U.S. was still trying to piece together what happened, the Soviet Navy had already decided. The Americans did it. In Moscow, Admiral Sergei Gorshkov reportedly ordered increased monitoring of NATO submarines. Within weeks, Soviet naval units began shadowing U.S. submarines across the Atlantic, especially near the Azores, the last known position of Scorpion. Some analysts would later call this the start of the silent retaliation. Scorpion's final orders. In the spring of 1968, USS Scorpion was returning from the Mediterranean. She'd been ordered to stop briefly near the Canary Islands to observe Soviet naval activity. Her last radio transmission, sent on May 21st, was routine and chillingly mundane. "We are observing Soviet units. We'll proceed to Norfolk as scheduled." It was the last anyone heard from her. 3 days later, Scorpion missed her scheduled check-in. 5 days later, she was declared overdue. 10 days later, the Navy knew she was gone. But sonar data captured on May 22nd told a different story. Hydroacoustic stations in the Atlantic recorded 2 distinct underwater explosions seconds apart. They didn't sound like mechanical failure. They sounded like torpedo detonations. The retaliation theory. According to one long-suppressed intelligence report later unearthed by journalists, U.S. analysts quietly concluded that Scorpion may have been torpedoed, either accidentally or deliberately, by a Soviet submarine. The reasoning was chillingly simple. 2 months earlier, America's reconnaissance operations had tracked and possibly compromised the Soviet sub K-129. Now, with K-129 gone, Scorpion's loss could have been the price paid for that intelligence victory, a one-for-one act of vengeance. One declassified CIA memo even used the phrase, "reciprocal action confirmed. Official disclosure prohibited." That phrase, reciprocal action, still sends chills down the spine of Cold War historians. The Soviet diary entry. In 1993, after the fall of the Soviet Union, researchers gained access to certain naval archives. Buried in the log of Admiral Vladimir Chernovin, then commander of the Soviet. May 23, 1968, the Americans mourned their lost hunters. Hunters. It was a NATO term used for U.S. attack submarines like the Scorpion. Coincidence? Or a quiet acknowledgement of responsibility? Even now, no one can say for sure. But for many, that cryptic note was confirmation that the Scorpion hadn't just sunk, she'd been sunk. Whispers from within, adding another layer to the mystery, were the men aboard her. One name, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rogers, appeared in naval records as being under investigation for classified security breaches before the mission. Though officially cleared to sail, rumors persisted that Rogers had been approached by Soviet agents during a previous deployment. If true, could he have passed information about Scorpion's route, or even its vulnerabilities? The theory gained traction after a 1990s interview with a retired intelligence officer who said, "We never confirmed sabotage, but the possibility was never off the table." Operation Azorian, a hidden parallel. While the world grieved Scorpion, the CIA launched a covert operation, Project Azorian, to recover K-129 from the Pacific depths using a ship built by billionaire Howard Hughes. The mission's true goal: retrieve Soviet nuclear weapons and codebooks. If the U.S. was willing to spend $500 million to lift K-129, why didn't they do the same for Scorpion? Because, as one declassified memo suggests, the recovery of Scorpion presents greater political and strategic risk. In other words, if the truth lay 10,000 feet below the Atlantic, maybe it was better to leave it there. The silence of two nations. By the end of 1968, both Washington and Moscow had come to an unspoken understanding. No public blame, no accusations, no escalation. Each would bury its dead and its secrets. For decades afterward, the official U.S. Navy report claimed catastrophic mechanical failure. But off the record, naval intelligence officers whispered a different verdict. Scorpion was lost due to hostile action, undisclosed for reasons of national security. The legacy of the lost 99. To this day, the families of the 99 crew members never received a full explanation. Their names are etched on plaques, their photographs faded by time. Yet behind every official condolence letter lies a single unanswered question. Was it an accident, or an act of war buried beneath the sea? As decades passed, the truth about the USS Scorpion faded into rumor and silence. But sound never truly disappears underwater. It travels, echoing for miles. And in those echoes, acoustic engineers may have found something extraordinary. The final, terrifying moments before the Scorpion imploded. The last signal, decoding the final minutes of the Scorpion. By 1968, the U.S. Navy was equipped with one of the most advanced underwater surveillance networks ever built, the SOSA system. It was designed to track Soviet submarines across the oceans, using vast chains of hydrophones hidden deep below the surface. But on May 22, 1968, those same sensors recorded something that would haunt naval analysts for decades. The sound of a submarine dying. And it wasn't Soviet. It was American. The unmistakable signature of catastrophe. Thousands of miles away, in a secure listening post in the mid-Atlantic, an operator monitoring the SOSUS line heard a faint, rhythmic tapping followed by a muffled thud. Moments later came two sharp bursts, underwater explosions, and then a long, rumbling collapse. Within hours, acoustic specialists at the Navy's Sound Surveillance Center began running spectral analyses on the recordings. The pattern was unmistakable: a torpedo detonation, followed by a hull implosion at extreme depth. The readings matched the known design of the USS Scorpion, suggesting that she had plunged far beyond her crush depth, somewhere around 11,000 feet, before disintegrating under pressure. One analyst later said, "You could hear the metal scream before it broke apart." Those tapes would become some of the most classified pieces of evidence in naval history. The mystery of the two explosions. The first detonation appeared to be a Mark 37 torpedo, the very weapon carried aboard Scorpion. The second, 22 seconds later, was weaker, likely caused by secondary detonation from fuel or compressed air tanks rupturing. But what triggered that first explosion? That's where the mystery begins to twist. Three main theories emerged, each darker than the last. Theory 1. A torpedo malfunction. The official U.S. Navy explanation points to a tragic technical failure. According to declassified maintenance records, one of Scorpion's Mark 37 torpedoes had been reported overheating before her final patrol. If its battery ignited accidentally, the torpedo could have armed itself while still inside the tube. In that scenario, the crew had less than 90 seconds to react. Standard procedure would be to eject the torpedo, but if it circled back, as these older models sometimes did, Scorpion could have been struck by its own weapon. That theory explains the acoustic data perfectly, but many insiders say it's too convenient. A story built to protect the Navy's reputation rather than reveal the truth. Theory 2. Enemy engagement. In the Cold War fog, shadowing enemy submarines was routine and often dangerous. Several U.S. and Soviet vessels had near collisions while stalking each other in the same waters. Declassified intelligence notes that two Soviet subs, a nuclear attack submarine and an Echo II class, were operating less than 200 nautical miles from Scorpion's last known position. If one of them mistook Scorpion's maneuvers for aggression, a torpedo launch could have been a reflex action. The Soviets might have seen the strike as retaliation for the earlier loss of K-129, their own missing submarine. But this theory was quietly dismissed in public, not because it lacked evidence, but because admitting it might have ignited World War III. Theory 3. Internal sabotage. The most controversial idea comes from the whispers of naval intelligence officers who worked the case long after it closed. They point to CPO Daniel Rogers, the same crewman rumored to be under quiet investigation before deployment. Records show he'd accessed sensitive navigation files days before departure, without authorization. There's no proof of espionage, but there were sealed crew reports later marked classified for national security. Some suggest a deliberate act, one man's vengeance, or an enemy's manipulation. But again, that's speculation, dangerous, unprovable, and shrouded in the fog of Cold War paranoia. Decoding the final transmission. What's rarely discussed publicly is the encrypted message that may have come just before the loss. According to a memo unearthed decades later, the Scorpion transmitted a short burst signal through the ELF, extremely low-frequency system, one used only for emergencies. The message was partially corrupted, but one word stood out: fire. If that signal was genuine, it suggested chaos on board, either an internal fire or an incoming attack. It never repeated, never followed up. Minutes later, the SOSUS system picked up those fatal sounds: explosion, implosion, silence. The wreck discovered. In 1968, the Navy quietly commissioned deep-sea explorer Dr. Robert Ballard, years before he found the Titanic, to locate the wreck. His classified mission succeeded. What he found was haunting. At a depth of 10,000 feet, the USS Scorpion lay broken in half. The forward section was twisted open, the sail crushed, and debris scattered across the ocean floor in a perfect arc, just as one would expect from a rapid pressure implosion. Near the wreck were fragments of the torpedo room, but no evidence of an external strike. Yet Ballard's team was not allowed to publish photographs for nearly 2 decades. He later hinted in interviews, "The evidence told a story, but not the one the Navy wanted told." the human element. Every mechanical sound in the SOSUS data hides human terror. 99 men who likely had no time to understand what was happening. Some experts estimate that from the moment the torpedo armed to the moment of implosion, less than 2 minutes passed. 2 minutes. 240 heartbeats. Then silence forever. Families back home never heard that story. Instead, they were told it was of a mechanical malfunction. Simple, clinical, and safe. But deep below the Atlantic, the truth was not simple. It was dark, fast, and final. Echoes that never fade. For decades, researchers continued studying the acoustic files, using new technology to reanalyze what happened in those final seconds. And the more they listened, the more unsettling it became. Hidden in the last moments of the recording was a faint metallic rattle, a sound consistent with manual torpedo ejection. That means the crew did try to fight back. They heard the weapon arm, tried to eject it, and failed. In the end, the Scorpion died not from conspiracy, not from war, but from the cruel indifference of technology and the crushing weight of the sea. As the decades rolled on, the U.S. Navy maintained its silence. But in the 1990s, when once classified files began to surface, the story of Scorpion's final minutes found new life and new controversy. For some, it proved human error. For others, it confirmed sabotage. And for many, it simply deepened a mystery. Because sometimes what lies buried beneath the ocean should never be disturbed. The hidden files, what the Navy knew and chose to bury. When the USS Scorpion failed to report for duty, the U.S. Navy launched one of the most extensive submarine search operations in Cold War history. For weeks, ships and aircraft scoured the North Atlantic, tracing her projected route home. By the time debris was found, a single piece of rubber from her hull insulation, the truth was already being classified. The Navy announced the loss publicly on June 5, 1968, with the calm, measured tone of bureaucratic tragedy. But behind the press statements, in locked briefing rooms and underground archives, something far more complicated was unfolding. A wall of silence. Families of the 99 men on board asked simple questions. What happened? Why? Where? They received one answer. The details remained classified for national security reasons. Within days of the discovery, the Navy convened a court of inquiry. Over 50 volumes of testimony and technical reports were compiled. Only a fraction of that information ever saw daylight. When portions were finally declassified decades later, entire pages were redacted in black. Not for security, but for secrecy. It became clear the Scorpion investigation wasn't about finding the truth. It was about controlling it. The omitted evidence. According to surviving documents, the initial inquiry concluded probable malfunction of the torpedo system, but internal memos reveal that investigators never had access to all SOSUS data. Entire hours of acoustic recordings were missing. Even more suspiciously, maintenance logs from the submarine's last stop in Rota, Spain, were rewritten after the fact. The original versions, which mentioned battery overheating issues and improper torpedo calibration, vanished from the archive entirely. Dr. John Craven, one of the Navy's top scientists at the time, once admitted in a 1990 interview, "We had more data than we were allowed to use. Someone upstairs didn't want all of it analyzed." It was a chilling statement, an insider hinting that truth itself was considered a threat. Technical fault or political liability. In 1968, the U.S. Navy had already lost another nuclear submarine, the USS Thresher, just 5 years earlier. The public outcry from that disaster had forced expensive safety reforms. If the Scorpion's loss had been due to another technical fault, it could have crippled funding, shaken morale, and undermined U.S. confidence during the Cold War. So a safer explanation was chosen: probable mechanical failure. No accountability, no scandal, no blame. But there was a detail too strange to ignore. The Scorpion had reported a malfunction before even leaving the Mediterranean. Her commanding officer requested a short repair period in port. The request was denied. He was ordered home immediately. That decision alone may have sealed the fate of the entire crew. The missing black box. Submarines don't carry flight-style black boxes, but Scorpion was equipped with an acoustic data logger, a device that recorded engine noise, reactor readings, and hull pressure changes. It was supposed to transmit telemetry to Navy stations periodically. That logger was never recovered. In fact, according to internal memos, the Navy stopped searching for it after just 3 weeks. Some suggest that's because it was recovered, and the data it contained was politically toxic. One memo from 1975 references classified acoustic anomalies consistent with onboard ordnance detonation. In simpler terms, a torpedo may have exploded inside the submarine. If that's true, it confirms the most damning theory, that Scorpion was destroyed by its own weapon while the Navy ignored repeated maintenance warnings. Suppressed testimonies. Crew families were eventually allowed to view select excerpts from the inquiry, but they were prohibited from copying or sharing them. Some noticed names redacted. Others, phrases like potential intelligence compromise and sensitive foreign involvement. One mother later told reporters, "They told us it was an accident, but the looks on their faces said something else, something they couldn't tell." In the following years, several naval officers who worked on the Scorpion case were reassigned or quietly retired. Those who spoke publicly were either discredited or ignored. Even Dr. Ballard, who found the wreck, once hinted that my real mission was something other than the Titanic. He later confirmed he had been sent first to locate the Thresher and Scorpion as part of a classified Navy program. The nuclear question. Another suppressed aspect of the story lies in what Scorpion carried: 2 nuclear-tipped torpedoes. Their presence at a depth of 10,000 feet raised fears of radioactive contamination. But instead of recovery, the Navy opted for containment. The wreck site was declared environmentally secure and sealed from further dives. Decades later, a classified report surfaced suggesting trace radiation had been detected in nearby currents, but it was dismissed as naturally occurring. To this day, Scorpion's nuclear weapons remain at the bottom of the Atlantic, silently decaying in the cold dark. Theories the Navy refused to admit. Several alternative theories emerged over the years. Soviet retaliation theory. Some intelligence insiders claim the Scorpion was targeted in response to the U.S. sinking of the Soviet submarine K-129. If true, acknowledging it would mean admitting a covert underwater war had taken place, something both nations denied. Internal sabotage theory. Declassified reports mention a possible crew disturbance before departure. The FBI even investigated whether a crew member had been compromised by foreign intelligence. That file remains sealed. Structural failure theory. The submarine's hull had already shown signs of metal fatigue. Pressure from deeper dives than recommended could have triggered the implosion, compounded by ignored maintenance. Every theory leads to one consistent truth. Somebody knew something and chose silence over disclosure. The files that never opened. In 1993, families filed a Freedom of Information Act request to unseal the full Scorpion investigation. It was denied. The reasoning? Releasing the documents could harm U.S. national security interests. Even 50 years later, those files remain sealed. And when historians ask why, they're told, because some mysteries are better left undisturbed. In the next chapter, we'll explore how those same secrets shaped Cold War policy, deepened distrust between nations, and kept the families of the 99 men forever in limbo. Because when the truth sinks too deep, it doesn't disappear, it waits. Beneath the waves, beneath the silence, beneath the lies, Cold War shadows, the silent chess game beneath the waves. The late 1960s were the darkest, most dangerous years of the Cold War. An age when the world's oceans hid more secrets than the sky. For every rocket launched into space, a submarine vanished into the deep, carrying nuclear weapons and coded orders. The USS Scorpion was one of them. But her disappearance wasn't just a tragedy. It was a move on a global chessboard where every piece was expendable. A world divided by fear. In 1968, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union had reached a fever pitch. Just 2 months before the Scorpion vanished, the Soviets lost their own submarine, the K-129, in the Pacific Ocean, a disaster that killed 98 crew members. To the world, these were unrelated accidents. But within intelligence circles, whispers began to circulate. One loss may have triggered the other. Could the Scorpion's destruction have been an act of retaliation, a Cold War strike buried under a sea of denials? Declassified Soviet records from the late 1980s mention unusual naval acoustic activity in the Atlantic that coincided with Scorpion's last known transmission. To some analysts, that wasn't coincidence, it was confirmation. The secret war nobody saw. While the world's eyes were fixed on Vietnam, the real shadow war raged beneath the waves. Both superpowers had deployed fleets of nuclear submarines, not just as deterrents, but as surveillance and sabotage units. Intelligence agencies like the CIA and KGB ran covert missions tracking each other's underwater vessels. Under Operation Holy Stone, U.S. submarines routinely followed Soviet ships to intercept communications and photograph missile silos. The Soviets responded with their own operations, Okine and Hydra. The Scorpion's final mission remains officially described as routine, but several retired Navy officers later admitted it wasn't. She had been tracking a Soviet naval group near the Canary Islands. Her final transmissions reported a shadow contact, a submarine tailing her. After that, silence. Intercepted signals and the SOSUS Enigma. The U.S. Navy's top-secret SOSUS network, an underwater array of hydrophones, recorded a faint sequence of explosions near the Scorpion's last known location. It was unlike any natural seismic event. Sound experts later reconstructed the audio. 2 short detonations, then a long implosion, consistent with a torpedo strike followed by hull collapse. Here's where the story twists. A Soviet Echo 2 class submarine was confirmed to be operating in the area at that time. Yet, officially, both governments denied any encounter occurred. Why the silence? Because acknowledging it might have meant admitting a Cold War act of war, one that could have pushed both nations to nuclear brinkmanship. The ocean, once again, became the perfect cover. No witnesses, no evidence, no accountability. The geopolitical silence. When the Scorpion was declared lost, President Lyndon B. Johnson was already under immense political pressure. Vietnam was spiraling. The U.S. public was losing faith in government truthfulness after the Tet Offensive. The last thing America needed was an international scandal suggesting its Navy had been outmaneuvered or ambushed. So the tragedy was wrapped in secrecy, buried under layers of national security and strategic ambiguity. Behind closed doors, intelligence officials likely made a deal. Both sides, the U.S. and the Soviets, would bury their dead in silence to avoid escalation. This mutual silence has since been confirmed by multiple Cold War historians as an unspoken diplomatic arrangement, a grim example of peace preserved through denial. Whispers from the Kremlin. Years later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, a retired KGB officer known only as Captain V claimed that Moscow knew the truth about the Scorpion. According to him, a Soviet torpedo fired by mistake during a pursuit gone wrong struck the American vessel. When the Soviets realized what had happened, they transmitted an emergency message to Washington via diplomatic channels, claiming a maritime accident has occurred. The U.S., fearing public outrage, chose silence. Though impossible to verify, this confession matched data that U.S. analysts had long suspected but never publicly acknowledged. Even more haunting, the location the Soviet officer described matched the Scorpion's wreck site found years later. Psychological warfare at sea. The loss of the Scorpion had more than tactical consequences. It became a weapon of fear, both sides whispering to their sailors that the ocean could swallow them at any time, and no one would ever know why. American naval crews were quietly reminded, never question official reports. Soviet submariners were told, your enemy hides behind silence, not strength. This manipulation of truth became one of the Cold War's most effective psychological tools. Truth was no longer a matter of fact. It was a matter of strategy. The last mission that wasn't in the logbook. A recently declassified intelligence memo hinted at a disturbing revelation. The Scorpion's final mission may not have been sanctioned through official naval channels. Instead, it might have been part of a joint Sea-Navy reconnaissance operation designed to monitor Soviet submarine movements near the Azores. That would explain why her route, orders, and transmissions were all off record, and why the official investigation never mentioned them. If true, Scorpion wasn't just a victim of mechanical failure or enemy fire. She was a pawn in a covert mission gone wrong, sacrificed to protect secrets deeper than the sea itself. The legacy of lies. To this day, the U.S. Navy maintains that Scorpion's loss was an accident, a possible torpedo malfunction. But in truth, no one outside those classified halls knows for sure. Her wreck rests silent at the bottom of the Atlantic, sealed by salt, time, and secrets. Every visit to the site is monitored. Every diver's access restricted. It's as if the ocean itself became a government vault, one that will never open. In our final chapter, we'll dive into what remains, the wreckage, the families, and the haunting question that echoes through every Cold War grave. If the truth lies beneath the sea, who decided it should never surface? Because the Scorpion story isn't only about a lost submarine. It's about how nations bury the truth, and how, sometimes, the silence is louder than the explosion itself. Echoes in the deep, the wreckage and the legacy of silence. The sea keeps its secrets longer than any nation. And in the cold, crushing depths of the Atlantic, nearly 10,000 feet below the surface, the USS Scorpion lies in eternal silence. Her steel body, broken and scattered across the seabed, is more than a wreck. It is a monument to unanswered questions and to the men who vanished without a goodbye. The discovery. In late October 1968, 5 months after the submarine's disappearance, U.S. Navy oceanographers and deep-sea experts began an extensive search using triangulated sonar and acoustic data from the SOSUS network. Finally, in October of 1968, they found her. At 32°54'N, 33°08'W, deep in the eastern Atlantic, southwest of the Azores, the Scorpion's shattered remains were discovered. Her hull was split in two. The forward section, mangled and compressed, bore evidence of a violent internal explosion. Nearby, fragments of her sail and torpedo casing were found, pieces of a puzzle that could never be fully reassembled. When the first photographs were released to select Navy officials, silence filled the room. It wasn't just the horror of the wreck, it was the implications. Something catastrophic had happened, but no one was willing to say what. The investigation that solved nothing. An official naval court of inquiry convened in 1969. Dozens of theories were considered. A malfunctioning torpedo detonating inside the ship, a hydrogen explosion caused by a faulty battery cell, that a possible external attack. But every lead ended in contradiction. Evidence was either missing, classified, or never collected properly. By the time the final report was declassified decades later, one conclusion stood out in its vagueness. The precise cause of loss cannot be determined. For the families of the 99 men aboard, those words felt like another death sentence. How could a billion-dollar vessel, manned by elite sailors, vanish, and no one could explain why? The families left behind. At naval bases across the United States, telegrams arrived quietly. No public memorials, no televised addresses, just folded flags and rehearsed condolences. Many families were told not to ask questions. Widows received briefings that contradicted one another. Some told of equipment failure, others of a classified mission gone wrong. For the children, the loss was harder to comprehend. Some grew up believing their fathers were still alive, that one day they'd come home from the deep mission. Others devoted their adult lives to uncovering the truth, filing FOIA requests, contacting journalists, and chasing whispers through old naval archives. But each request met the same cold response. Information withheld in the interest of national security. That phrase became their second tragedy. Return to the abyss. In 1985, ocean explorer Dr. Robert Ballard, the same man who would later find the Titanic, was secretly commissioned by the U.S. Navy to locate and photograph the Scorpion wreck. The mission's public purpose was testing deep-sea equipment, but in reality, Ballard's objective was far darker. He was ordered to inspect the wreck for signs of nuclear contamination and to assess whether any warheads or torpedoes could be recovered. The images he captured were haunting. The submarine's hull lay twisted and open like a cracked egg. The torpedo room was obliterated. Personal items, a boot, a mug, a torn manual, lay scattered on the seabed like ghosts of the men who once lived there. Ballard later admitted that the Scorpion wreck was more disturbing than the Titanic because it felt recent, modern. The steel still shined. The story still unfinished. The decades of silence. More than 50 years later, the official story has not changed. The U.S. Navy maintains that Scorpion was lost due to unknown causes. Every attempt by journalists, historians, or family members to reopen the investigation has been quietly dismissed. Requests to visit the wreck site are denied. Its coordinates remain heavily guarded, marked as a restricted military grave. Even remote submersible footage is reviewed and censored before release. Why? Because some believe that Scorpion's wreck still hides evidence of what really happened. Perhaps proof of a Cold War clash, a covert mission, or a weapon failure too dangerous to admit. Whatever the truth, it remains locked in the dark, sealed by policy, and protected by the same ocean that claimed her. The legacy of the lost. Yet, despite the secrecy, the Scorpion endures as a symbol. To submariners around the world, she represents the silent cost of service. The knowledge that their missions may never be known, their deaths never explained. To historians, she remains a reminder of how governments use silence as a weapon. And to families, she is an unhealed wound, proof that sometimes the truth is not lost at sea, it's buried by choice. Every May, former sailors and relatives gather at the Norfolk Naval Base Memorial. 99 names engraved in black granite, polished by rain, touched by time. They recite the Navy hymn. Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm hath bound the restless wave. And when the ceremony ends, only the wind answers. No one mentions torpedoes. No one mentions the Cold War. Just the simple truth that 99 men went down and never came home. Echoes that never fade. If you listen closely, the ocean still speaks. Not in words, but in pressure, vibration, and silence. Sonar operators have reported strange acoustic anomalies near the Scorpion site. Metallic echoes that seem too rhythmic, too deliberate. Some call it interference. Others call it memory. But among submariners, there's a saying. The deep never forgets it's dead. Perhaps it's superstition. Or perhaps it's the sound of a story that refuses to rest. And so, the USS Scorpion remains. A ghost beneath the Atlantic, where truth and myth have become one. A reminder that beneath every flag, every classified document, and every speech about national interest, there are human lives, sons, brothers, fathers, lost to silence. The Scorpion's legacy is not just about a submarine that vanished. It's about the cost of secrets, and how, even half a century later, the truth still lies entombed beneath 10,000 feet of water. If the sea could speak, what would it confess? Beneath the cold surface of the Atlantic, a steel coffin rests, silent, unblinking, eternal. The USS Scorpion has slept there since 1968, a monument to what happens when human ambition meets the unknown. Some say it was a mechanical failure. Others whisper about sabotage or something far stranger, because deep-sea experts still cannot explain the violent implosion pattern or the unusual acoustic signals captured before the sub vanished. It's almost as if the ocean swallowed its secrets and refused to give them back. What truly happened to the Scorpion may never be known, but maybe that's what draws us to these mysteries. Not the answers, but the questions they leave behind. Did the crew sense their fate in those final minutes? Did they hear the sound that ended everything? Or does the deep still echo with what they tried to say before silence fell? Some explorers claim that strange sonar pulses still register in that region, Metallic, rhythmic, almost alive. Is it mere coincidence? Or is it something or someone trying to be heard after all this time? At Mystery Vault 80, we dive into the places where history ends and the unexplained begins. The Scorpion reminds us that even in an age of science and power, there are still stories that defy reason and tragedies that refuse to be contained by logic alone. If this mystery stirred your imagination, like, share, and comment below with your theory. Was it mechanical failure, human error, or something else entirely? Your insights help keep the search alive. And don't forget to subscribe to Mystery Vault 80, where every week we open another vault, one filled with strange disappearances, unexplained events, and the lingering whispers of what lies beyond the known. Because sometimes, truth isn't buried in documents. It's buried in the deep.